Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be venturing into the world of cryptids. No aliens in this video, guys, don't worry. I also have the pleasure of inviting Daughter of Darkness to today's video. So be sure to check out her channel, link at the end of the video and in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. One year when I was about 15, I went to a scout camp in Bear Lake in Idaho. I haven't forgotten about it since, and I still honestly believe, I saw something supernatural. The whole week we were there, it had been mostly sunny and warm, but one day it got really cloudy and stormy. It started out as a drizzle during the day, but quickly turned into a torrential downpour at night. The campsite troop was assigned to us that night on the bank of the lake towards the south end. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was pitch black and the wind was howling like a chorus of upset toddlers. The reason I had to wake up? I needed to pee like crazy. So we have this buddy rule that if you go anywhere you need to bring your buddy with you, especially at night. It's not called Bear Lake for nothing. So I wake him up and tell him I need to go. He groggily says, "Are you serious?" When he saw me wiggling like a madman, he got out of his sleeping bag, grabbed his flashlight and jacket, and we get our boots on and unzip the tent. Instantly, we become drenched. We start walking towards the outhouse when about midway there we hear this loud-ass roar. Thinking it was a bear, I start to panic. We turned around but couldn't see anything without our flashlights. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminates the sky, and we see a creature with a massive wingspan. A long neck, spiked tail, and as it flew over us we could see the silhouette of it, its wings in a downbeat. As it passes, the air from the downbeat literally pushes us into the mud. Terrified, we run back to the tent and hide. Needless to say, I totally forgot about needing to pee until morning. To this day, me and my friend still talk about what we saw, and we both agree that it was a dragon.
I used to live in a creepy log cabin in Central Oregon between the ages of 5 and 11. The previous owner went crazy according to the landlord and shot himself in the head in the garage. A lot of creepy stuff happened there, as you can well imagine, but nothing quite as real as this. When I lived there, beginning at the age of 6, I had a reoccurring dream that this pasty-looking thing would crawl out from under the floorboards in my closet and come up to my bed. Then I'd wake up. I had this dream at least once a month. A couple of years after the dream started, we had our oven replaced. The workmen needed to get under the house, and they said that they were sure that we had a crawl space. At that point, nobody in our family knew that we had a crawl space in our house at all. The place in my dreams where that thing crawled out of my closet just looked like a piece of weird wood on my floor, and that was in my closet. But we had no idea that there was an actual crawl space under there. But it turns out it was. Fast forward to the age of 10, and I had my cousin and 2 best friends over, and we wanted to play hide and seek in the dark outside. We hid in pairs, so my cousin and I would hide and my friends would seek, then vice versa. So my cousin and I closed our eyes and started counting. Keep in mind that one of my friends had really long white blonde hair down to her butt, so she was pretty easy to spot in the dark. As soon as we opened our eyes to seek, right away we saw something white and glowing in the grass a bit beyond the lawn. So I said to my cousin, "I see my friend out there." My cousin saw it too, so we walked over towards it. When we were about 4 feet away, I said, "All right, we found you." The thing that I thought was my friend was crouched down, and as soon as I said that, it turned its head and stared at me for like 5 seconds. It was completely hairless, a white humanoid thing. Crouched down, it was as tall as me, and its eyes were milky white, like a blind person's, and they were perfectly round, not shaped like a human's, although the body and facial structures were very human-like. It was super scrawny, and you could see its ribs, and its eyes and face were sunken in, and the fingers were extremely long. When that thing was staring at me, I just stood there and looked back. I was so scared I couldn't move. But finally, my brain was like, "You gotta get out of here now." So I backed up right into my cousin, who hadn't seen anything yet. She got upset and pushed me because I backed into her. That is, until she got a good look at what was in the grass, because it got up and walked into the forest behind the property. I started running back to the house, tripped and hurt my leg, and my cousin was crying because she was so scared. My two friends came out from hiding on the other side of the yard to see what was going on. We all kind of freaked out. After I saw the thing that night, my recurring dreams of it crawling out from under the floorboards stopped. I don't really remember what happened the rest of the night, but after that, I didn't sleep alone or go outside at all for 3 months. I put blankets on all of my windows and stayed in my room researching what that thing could have been for like 5 days straight. Has anyone had a similar experience? Please let me know. I really want answers.
I live in Wyoming, Michigan, about a walking distance away from a resurrection cemetery. If you look it up on Google Maps, you'll see it has a tree line surrounding it. The tree line closest to the woods is where I've seen something multiple times. Well, you can determine what it is for yourself. The first encounter I had with it was with my sister. She was going to walk through the cemetery. It was late at night, and I had the gut instinct to go with her, so I did. We were playing Pokemon Go, and I didn't like the forested area around it, especially this large pine tree. That, via a maintenance path, led to the crematorium. I was scared out of my mind, but we went towards the crematorium anyway to get a Pokestop and find a Jigglypuff. We had to go so close that we were now on the maintenance path, but the nice cobblestone half. It was when I looked to my right that I saw the creature, hunched over. It almost looked like a normal human being, but more terrifying. It appeared to have seen me too because it stood up. It was tall, at least 7 feet in height. I told my sister to run and we legged it home, where I proceeded to pray in my room for a while. My mum had a sighting too. She mentioned seeing it, something grey, hunched over the top of the pine tree. She mentioned seeing something grey and hunched over in the top of the pine tree. When she looked back though, it was gone. Safe to say we went home early that day. I consider myself a little bit sensitive, and when I close my eyes sometimes around that area, I think I can see it. The 2 gaping holes staring back at me. My mum described the creature, and I recognized it as something I'd drawn a few weeks ago. I burned this image, but have since redrawn it. My most recent sighting, and the one that kept me from returning to the cemetery, happened in broad daylight with a friend. His name is Mark. We wandered around the cemetery for hours until my arms started hurting, and I decided that we should go home for a snack. As we walked, my anxiety heightened. I told him about this creature, but I suspected we wouldn't have to worry as it was daytime. As we were walking along the sidewalk, about to reach the tree line, I saw a dead squirrel and dog in the middle of the sidewalk. I looked up, and I see the crawler running straight past into the tree line. It was grey, and ran on all 4s rather than 2 legs. I told my friend to run, and he did. We both ran until we reached the intersection. I would appreciate any advice on what the hell this is.
I'm 15 years old. I know, a bit young to be credible, but I've seen some stuff. I've lived for most of my life in Michigan, and my grandparents live in the northern part of the state, and we visit them either on our way to our lake house or just to see them. They kinda live in the middle of nowhere, like a 25-minute drive to the nearest town kind of thing. Their nearest neighbors are a mile away, and while their property is huge, they live in a small trailer in the middle of the property. They have 2 pastures, one on either side of their land, and in the back there are trails that take you through the woods that go on for miles. My grandfather uses them for hunting. One day I was in the front yard hitting golf balls from the front yard to the pasture. After I had hit them all, I went to go collect them. So I opened the gate and shut it behind me so that the dogs didn't get through, and I walked around picking up the balls. A couple of them went a little further than normal, so I had to walk behind the pasture into the woods. As I was walking, I could hear leaves crunching, but they were out of sync with my steps. And I kept hearing this weird noise behind me, kind of like a watery sound, I guess you could say. It sounded like someone had just gotten out of the shower and they were dripping wet. But the noise kept starting and stopping, so I thought maybe it was the wind blowing water off the leaves in the trees. As I found the last ball, I turned around to start heading back, when I saw something tall move behind a tree. I could tell it was taller than me, but I really didn't know what it was. Being from Michigan, I know we have our fair share of scary animals that would love to take a bite out of you. But this was definitely not a wolf, and it wasn't a bear. So I just kinda stood there frozen, looking at the tree. After a while, it crawled out, and I could see the whole thing. It had skinny arms, like it hadn't eaten in a while, and dark skin that looked shiny, almost like it was slimy. Its body was just a mass of flesh. It didn't seem to have a defined area for a stomach or a chest. It was just a twisted-up, malformed mound of flesh. The legs were just as long and messed up looking as the arms, and both the feet and hands were elongated. Not massively so, but you could really tell they were longer than your average feet and hands. Its head is the part that I'm really having a hard time describing. It had eyes, no hair, and a mouth that didn't open. The nose was just 2 holes, and it had a very long, exaggerated chin, but it looked kind of normal in a way. It stared at me, and without opening its mouth, it made those watery sounds that I'd been hearing, and it seemed to come from the nose as the holes flared. It started to walk around, not towards me, but just around. Then, it stood up on 2 legs, and it was probably 6.5 feet tall, and it looked really scary. The thing moved its neck in a most unnatural way, and it looked at me again. It was maybe 25 yards away, way too close for comfort for me, but I wasn't about to run and have this thing charge me. Yet, all of a sudden, it did bolt right towards me. I opened my eyes wide and prepared myself for impact, but it just ran right past me and into the woods. I turned to watch, and it just kept running away from me, sometimes on all 4s, and sometimes on 2 legs. It ran both ways. Very unnatural and very unnerving. At that point, I ran back to the pasture and shut the gate behind me. I didn't tell my grandparents right away. It took me a couple of months. When I finally did, my grandfather pulled me aside and asked me what it looked like exactly. I told him what I'd seen, and he told me that he'd seen it before too, out on the trails when he was hunting. He didn't say much, but he told me not to worry. I haven't really told anyone but family and close friends about this, but I guess that just changed now. This really messed me up for a long time. The scary thing is, I've seen it several more times, in different places. Never at my home, but anywhere up north, even at our lake cabin that's an hour away from my grandparents. That first encounter, though, was by far the scariest, and I wonder what it is. I know it's not a skinwalker, at least it shouldn't be. But does anyone know of any possible thing that it could be? Please help me to figure this out.
I lived in Montana on some land my dad owns, and I was hiking up a mountain like I do frequently. I heard this really weird screaming coming from the other side of the mountain, away from my house and deeper into the woods. It wasn't a mountain lion, too deep and long, and it went on for about 10 seconds, and I'm fairly confident it wasn't a bear. It kind of sounded like a human, almost distorted, almost like someone was possessed by something, sort of like what you'd hear in a horror movie. I got to the top of the mountain, pulled out my binoculars, and looked into the general direction of the scream. That's where I saw it. A weird, humanoid-looking creature, as white as paper and without any hair or clothes or genitals for that matter. And its arms were longer than its body. It had these huge black eyes that covered most of its face, and it was walking, but as soon as I saw it, it stopped and stared at me. I watched it carefully, I don't even know for how long, thinking that it was staring straight into my soul. I had to look away because my eyes had started watering from not blinking. When I looked back, after wiping my eyes, it was gone. I couldn't see it anymore, which made me think it was a weird hallucination or something. I decided to get the hell away from the area and ran back home. The scariest part is that 5 minutes after I walk in the door, I hear the scream again. It was much closer and made my ears ring. Now that I think about it, I remember that I could hear my dad yell at me whenever I needed help with something every other time I was up there. I'm pretty sure it was where I was standing where I first saw it. My dad heard it too, so it wasn't just a hallucination. And my neighbor was talking about the screams a week after it happened. I've researched it as best I could, but I've never found anything except a description. I've never seen it since, and my dad hasn't either. One of the many reasons I moved in with my mum in Arizona.
I moved to a new house a few months ago. It's in a normal residential neighborhood within a half-mile of some woods with deer. My house is off a fairly busy road, but the backyard shares a big meadow with other fenced-in yards. There's no street behind the house, just a big triangle of land with lots of wildlife. One night, a couple of months ago around 10 p.m., I heard a screeching sound. At first I thought it was a bird. It was loud and had short, repetitive, high-pitched squawking sounds, and it seemed like it was coming from the window next to my bed. As I listened longer, though, it sounded less like a bird, and it also sounded like it was coming from the opposite side of the room that I originally thought. It sounded like it was now over near my bathroom, below the floorboards. I called out for my roommate, and after I calmed down a bit, we listened to it for 2 hours under the floor. It made a coughing, screeching sound, as well as a lip-smacking sound at odd intervals, which was kind of scary. There were also sounds of heavy breathing. It would move around to different places beneath the bathroom floor, and sometimes it would sound like it was 5 feet away at the bottom of the crawl space, and other times it would be up against the floor immediately below us, just seconds later, on the other side of the room. We do have a possible rational explanation, though. We found a dirt tunnel by the crawl space outside, large enough for a raccoon. We also found a chewed-through basement window with a possum near it, so I think it may have been a possum, but there are still some unexplained details that nag at me. Over the course of the 2 hours, the sound moved from the bottom of the crawl space to the top very quickly, too quickly for it to have been a raccoon or a possum. The other thing is, the crawl space under the house is totally open and it runs the length of the house, so I don't understand why an animal would fixate on just the space underneath the bathroom when it could have gone unfettered anywhere through the crawl space. Could an animal have been stalking my pet bird, which I keep in the bathroom? Was it stalking the space under where it heard the bird sounds? Also, our bathroom windows are made of glass brick, and that whole night, I saw a white shape outlined standing outside. It sounds cheesy, but it looked like the profile of a creepy white person crouching outside the window. and the next day, it was gone. And right next to where it was standing is where we found the burrowed tunnel, which we now filled with concrete to keep out whatever it was. So what do you think? A disgruntled possum? Or was it a crawler who's all about eating the other white meat? I've been creeped out and somewhat paranoid about locking my door, but I forgot to lock it the other night and I woke up with 2 itchy puncture wounds. Each one was about 2 centimeters long and 1.8 centimeters apart. What could it be? Can you put my fears to rest?
Me, my uncle, and my grandfather are all avid outdoorsmen. We've heard it all, including bobcats during mating season, which, if you haven't heard, sounds like a woman screaming. Quite honestly, this scared the crap out of me the first time I heard it when I was around 10, and honestly probably accounts for a lot of encounters that people claim to have out in the woods. As for my uncle, however, nothing ever phases him, and he's the most down-to-earth, no-nonsense outdoorsman I know, and has had many close encounters with black bears, bobcats, and even a cougar, and he always shares these tales with the younger kids at the bonfires. But one time he told me and my grandfather about something that he could not explain, something that chilled him straight to the bone, and made him question how much he really does know about the woods. Now this takes place deep in the Appalachian Mountains, west of Boone, but I don't know the exact spot, as he would never say. Him and his buddy Brian were backpacking, as they had done many times before. He had a larger group that did this sort of thing every year, but this time it was just the 2 of them. Now this trail they are on is miles from any road, much less residency, and is not the sort of trail you would encounter other hikers on. This is pure wilderness. A few days into the hike, they set up camp overnight next to a stream they were following, cooked dinner, and then turned in their tents for the night. Sometime later, and my uncle was awoken by something outside their camp. He listened intently, although he wasn't alarmed. Perhaps they had left food out, and a bear or raccoon had wandered up to snatch a quick bite. He then noticed that whatever was outside the tent was big, really big, and he could feel the impact of its feet hitting the ground. By now he had grabbed his 44-point Magnum and laid it on his chest, just in case, of course. He still wasn't alarmed, as he had had many close encounters with bears before, and that's when he realized it. In the dead of the night there were no sounds, and the woods were oddly quiet, and he could hear the individual footsteps, and they were only 2. Whatever was outside his tent was not walking on 4 legs, but 2. At this point he starts getting genuinely scared as the footsteps get closer and closer to the tent. He could now hear the heavy, raspy breaths of the creature, almost like a grunting sound that it took with each step. By now, his firearm was pointed right in the direction of the noise. He had no clue as to the height of the creature, but he could tell it was big, like a 300-pound man walking through his camp. And then he heard the creature simply slowly walk back into the woods going upstream, and heard the leaves rustle a bit as it entered back into the forest. And then the return of silence. Upon waking up the next day, he thought he may have dreamt it, when Brian came running up to him asking if he had heard whatever the hell was outside their camp that night. They immediately looked for tracks, but found nothing. The story doesn't end there, however. Sometime later they went backpacking again around the same area, although not exactly the same. They were all sitting around the campfire when they heard a pack of coyotes howling, which is not uncommon in that part of the state. They were listening to this symphony when out of nowhere came a deadening noise that echoed all through the valley. He described it as if a really big 200-pound muscular man had taken a baseball bat and slammed it against a tree as hard as he could. The forest immediately went silent, and not a single coyote howl or yip was heard again for the rest of the night. Now my uncle was dead serious when he was telling me this story, and isn't the type to make up stories to sound cool. It's really against his character, and I believed every word he said. My grandfather offered little to no insight as to what it could have been. As for me, it does sound a lot like the other Bigfoot stories I've read online, especially for knocking. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear your own ideas.
A while ago, I had a Wendigo encounter that shook me up pretty badly, so I took a break to get over the shock of being so close to death. But then I decided to go back to the scene of the crime to see if I could maybe get this creature on tape. I was too afraid to go back alone, so I took my dog with me this time. That meant it took a bit longer to get into the woods. My Great Dane puppy gets distracted very easily, and she always wraps her leash around me as we walk because she can't pick a side and stick to it. She's still a puppy, so I have to remind myself not to get too worked up about that. She was just under a year old at the time, but still a Great Dane, and still a lot of puppy to control. While I was planning to go out there, I asked my dad if he would buy me a good camera so I could make videos. But once I was forced to explain why I wanted it, he called me crazy and declined while laughing at me. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff. At least I had my mini flashlight and my iPhone camera to use. But when a dog is tugging on your arm, it's kinda hard to aim and film. You know how the police officers hold their gun and their flashlight over it? Well, that's what I was trying to do with my phone and my flashlight, since my phone light wasn't nearly enough to get good film quality and film clearly. We arrived in the woods around 9 p.m. It seemed like everything started moving around dusk. The Wendigo we had seen before came out around that time, so I was looking around and filming along the edges of the woods, seeing if I could find any movement or anything out of place. I did see a couple of deer, and that disappointed me, as usually deer run away from these creatures. So I figured if deer were around, Wendigos weren't. I remember one time I found a deer carcass that was completely drained of its blood, and it had 2 holes in its neck. Every other part of it was completely unscathed. It was like a cliché vampire type thing. Anyway, back to the point. I was looking around, filming, and I was ready to give up when I saw some movement. The deer all got spooked and ran away. Then, a big black figure squatting near the ground came crawling towards us. My dog started panicking, and I knew this was my cue to leave. I wasn't going to risk my life for terrible film quality. That was honestly the only thing I was worried about. If I died, then fine, but only if I had a really good camera and could leave behind really high-quality film to let people discover the reason for my disappearance. But since I didn't have a good camera, I was out of there fast, with my dog in tow. I didn't even realize what I caught on my iPhone camera until I looked at the footage a little bit later. When we were first walking into the place, my camera was angled slightly downwards. I noticed that my dog was sniffing around at the time, but I ignored it. But I saw on camera that walking up to me from one of the 2 bushy areas was a small creature, maybe 6 inches tall. You could see it come out from behind a bush, then run behind the second bush to hide, then peek around. It was clear as day on camera. Then there was another one, maybe a foot tall. It looked like a big walking stick, but it had 2 misplaced eyes and a small O-shaped mouth with tiny twigs on its head. I didn't see them at the time because I was focused on the woods behind them and wasn't looking down. But by the camera angles, I estimate that they were no more than 5 feet away from me. As the camera was pointed at the woods, the little 6-inch figure froze when I stopped moving. I think it thought I saw it, but I hadn't. Once I started getting freaked out about the big black figure crawling towards us, you can hear me scream on camera calling my dog's name. Just then, on camera, one of the creature's small friends seemed to try to scare me away or divert my attention so the little guy could run away without being seen. Coincidentally, it happened at the same time that the big black figure I saw scared me away. I think these things I caught on camera are called wood sprites, or some people call them fairies or fae in a more general reference. There must be a bunch of these things in the woods. They seem to be like guardians or something because they were seemingly trying to keep me out. I've heard about this sort of thing before. It was a very lighthearted, happy experience seeing these videos of the wood sprites, though I figure they really are probably just as dangerous as the other creatures, but at least they look cute. I'll still be bringing my dog with me every time I go into the woods, by the way. It's pretty scary thinking about all the times that I went deep into those woods at night exploring, with who knows what watching me. This is a forest that never sleeps. By the way, I've had people asking me to upload the video, but I don't know how to do that on Reddit, and I'm too anxious to give out my phone number or my social media names, so I'm sorry.
I was at my girlfriend's house for the weekend, which is usually every Friday to Sunday, and in of itself isn't that unusual. We both recently started college. She still lives with her parents and 2 younger brothers. It was about 4:50 in the morning, and this is when the creepy stuff began. You see, everyone else in the house was asleep, except for us. We love staying up late to play video games or watch films. We just finished watching a movie, in fact, and were preparing to go to sleep. I was getting changed into shorts and a shirt to sleep, and my girlfriend went to the kitchen to get us both a glass of water, since her room can get very hot and stuffy during the summer. After getting changed, I was chilling on the beanbag in her room, waiting for her to return. At this point, it's important to understand the basic layout of where she lives, otherwise this next part might be slightly confusing. So her house is about 8 minutes outside the city limits, and she has a long driveway that goes from the road up a hill that leads to her house. Her house is surrounded by trees and fairly dense forest, and her nearest neighbors are a good couple of minutes away. At the end of her driveway is a motion sensor that, when activated by movement, then makes 3 loud beeps inside her home. Her dad is a fairly high-ranking military man, so he definitely takes precautions and safety measures to ensure his family's safety. And like I said before, she was in the kitchen alone at around 4 a.m., while I am still in her bedroom. Her kitchen is down the hallway and through the living room from where her bedroom is, so she should be back within a minute or 2. She was just taking at least triple the usual amount of time, and right before I was going to head into the kitchen to check on her, she walked around the corner with a worried look on her face. She can be spooked pretty easily, so I wasn't alarmed at first. She handed me the water and then started to explain quickly why she had taken so long. She'd pretty much said that she was in the kitchen, in the sink, filling up the water, when she heard a whining sound coming outside the 2 windows near the sink. She figured it was one of her 2 dogs and decided to go to the garage to check on them. They were both curled up in their kennels when she opened the door, asleep, and had only just been woken up by her turning on the light to see them. She told me at that point she was pretty confused and slightly uneasy. She walked back into the kitchen and heard this really deep, weird bark coming again from somewhere outside the kitchen windows. And please note that it was 4 a.m, so it's nearly pitch black outside, especially since the dense trees around their house block up plenty of moonlight. She told me she couldn't see anything and hurried back to the room to tell me. I was slightly skeptical at first, since I assumed it was just the dogs and that my girlfriend was really tired and tripping out, so I agreed to follow her back to the kitchen. At first I heard nothing for a good 2 minutes and decided to try and recreate what she had done. I walk in, turn on the sink and wait. Another 2 minutes go by and I hear the same freaky whining sound coming from outside the window. It sounded so much like a wounded animal. I had to turn on the lights on the garage again, which was slightly lighting up the area outside the window, but I couldn't see a sign of animals or anything. She switched off the light, and then we heard the whining sound grow further away, almost as if the creature had fled up the hill near the kitchen and towards the forest. That was when we realized that it was scared or sensitive to the lights, so we left the kitchen and returned to her room. At this point I was pretty spooked, and I wanted to make sure that whatever it was had been scared off for good. So we go back into the kitchen, and after a few minutes, both armed with decently sized knives that my girlfriend has in her room for protection. 5 minutes go by in the kitchen, and it's silent. But then the whining starts up again, and a weird, sad barking sound, like something imitating an injured animal, was maybe 10 feet outside the kitchen windows. And at that moment I realized something. There's no reason for some creature to try and imitate an injured animal's sound unless it wanted to lure us out and cause us harm. I get slightly annoyed at it and start to yell at it to go away, and everything falls silent. Then I hear movement outside the window and a weird sound, almost as if something was moving alongside the wall right under the window. Then, whatever it was lets out this unnatural sound, almost like a groan and a growl. My girlfriend and I looked at each other and sprinted out the kitchen without a word. We hid in her room until we passed out at 5 or 6 a.m. We had talked it over, listened to a ton of animal noises, and not a single one got anywhere close to the final unnatural sound. I wouldn't even be able to accurately mimic the sound. It was so eerie and haunting, and I can still hear it in my head. So we did some research the next day, and there are a few known possibilities that we came up with. Perhaps a Wendigo, skinwalker, I don't know, maybe even something else. We looked around outside in the morning, and there was no blood and no tracks, so definitely no injured animal. However, on the hill about 10 feet in front of the kitchen window, we saw 2 heavy indents on the ground and then flattened grass leading up. We decided to tell one of my girlfriend's brothers about this experience so that he could help test something. We had one person go inside the kitchen sink near the windows and the other walk around in various places near the windows making sounds to try and triangulate where the creature had been standing. We concluded it was at one point no more than 5 feet from the windows, and then at another point it fled up the hill, which matched with the trampled grass and indents leading up the hill. Farther up the hill there's a path that branches, and another part of the path is fairly abandoned and overgrown. Nobody has walked there in at least 2 years, and I followed it to the end and kept going a little further looking for tracks. I did manage to find something interesting. A 3-foot-tall fern and brambles almost completely flattened, and a few twigs snapped perfectly in half as if something decently large had walked through the area in a hurry, and it seemed very recent. We then decided to tell my girlfriend's parents about it, and her dad seemed especially interested in it. He told us that the wood panels on the pump house had been torn off within the last few days. He then took one of the dogs into the woods, and we assume he checked for any signs. He returned and about 2 days later installed a camera right next to the kitchen window where we heard the sounds. And again, he's a pretty high-ranking military man, and he 100% believes that there was something going on that night. If anyone has any thoughts or input, I'd appreciate it.
This happened about 10 minutes after I left work on July 4th, 2020. I live in Northeast Ohio, and I got a new job about 2 months prior to this as a process technician at a dairy plant. The pay is good, but it's a 35-mile drive one way, and after about 20 miles, I have to drive through a heavily wooded area. I work the 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift, so the drive home every morning kinda sucks because there's always a lot of fog, and I drive the same route every day and night. On July 4th, I was on my way home, and I had just left the residential area of my workplace and was going through the wooded area. As I said, there's almost always fog every night, so I'm on high alert for deer, raccoons, and other animals. It was just like every other drive home. I had a podcast on, and I was focused on the road and thinking about getting a sausage McMuffin from McDonald's. All of a sudden, I saw eyes reflecting in the headlights. Out of the woods came a coyote. Now, coyote aren't too rare. I've seen them by my high school, but I'd never seen them outside my hometown, so it kind of surprised me. I started slowing down as it crossed the road, and then it turned around and faced my car and sat down in the road about 10 feet from my car. I was going to go around it, but I thought, this is just too odd of a thing to happen to just drive away from. I expected it to just get up and walk away at any given moment. But this is where I began to get very scared. I honked my horn, and after about 2 or 3 seconds, the coyote smiled at me. I had my bright lights on, and I could see it perfectly. This coyote had human teeth. My heart dropped, and every hair on my body was standing on end, just like it is now recalling the incident. It smiled for about a second before getting up and running back into the woods. I sat there in fear for about 5 seconds before putting my foot to the pedal and driving off at getaway car speed. I didn't stop for food or anything because fear had taken my appetite. The rest of the ride home was spent thinking about what I saw. I bounced back and forth between doubting myself and not. But like I said, with my bright lights on and how close it was to the car, I saw it clear as day. That coyote had human teeth, and there's no doubt about it. I'm very into paranormal stuff, and that includes cryptids. Is it possible that I ran into a skinwalker or some genetically mutated coyote? I'm Native American, if that counts for anything. So it's weird for me to be typing this out, as normally we don't share these things with others. But I'd like someone who knows about these things to help me. I do know one thing, though. From now on, I'm driving a new route to work.
So I live in a somewhat medium-sized town, with a mix of cities and backwoods areas. A bus stop I usually use is a good mix. It has buildings close by while also having entryways into the nearby surrounding woods. One morning I was waiting for the bus when I realized it was late that morning. I got annoyed and decided since I was bored, I would go into this little walkway/trail that was nearby, not all the way, just enough to where I could be secluded by the trees. After a while of checking my phone, I heard the bus stop at the stop a little way down from mine. I headed back to the stop, so I got there and got a fight or flight response that was very intense, almost as if a firearm had been shot off. I turn around to see this crouching creature coming out of the secluded area I was just in. It's pitch dark. Its arms were about the size of half its body. Its head looked like an unused eraser, and the most terrifying part of it was its size. It was easily the size of a telephone or lamp pole. It towered over me and everything around it. Its hands were large and its fingers were thick, and were about the size of half my arm. I didn't know if I should run because I knew this thing could catch me in a few strides. Some time passed while it climbed out the walkway and stood looking at me. Then the bus pulled up and opened its doors. I looked at the bus and back at the creature, but it was gone. Vanished. I looked at the bus driver and his face was normal. I assumed he hadn't actually seen anything. I got on the bus and silently cried for a few minutes. I don't know if this is correlated or not, or if it's just my brain, but that night I had a dream where the exact same thing happened except the bus didn't show up, and that thing tore me to pieces. My friend called it the Line Man, but I don't care about naming it. I went back to the bus stop over the course of the next few weeks, and every time I do, I always check to see if it's there. And it happened again. Once while walking back from church, in a side facing the mountain, I got the same fight or flight response and I stood still. And then I looked to my left, where the thing's giant hand was sitting. It noticed me, so it moved out of the brush towards me, but I ran, and I saw it stand, and it was easily as tall as the church. I ran around, got my car, and drove off. I then contemplated what would have happened to me had I not run. The other story is from last night. I was trying to sleep, but I kept on waking up because my heart would beat intensely, giving me an adrenaline rush. Not only that, but I heard banging vibrations and twigs snapping from the back of my property. I got up and looked out my window when I saw something that kept me up for the rest of the night. On my roommate's car was a muddy/rainy handprint bigger than my torso. That morning I got up and went to the bus stop and saw 2 more things that have stuck with me since. I saw a giant footprint easily about the size of half my body. I also saw my neighbor wailing over the fact that the apparent storm had ripped one of her trees out the ground. But I don't think this was the storm. This isn't fiction, and I actually don't know what to do.
I'd like to thank Mortis Media for all the help he's given me and others. There aren't a lot of creators out there as generous as our Mort. He's a real champion for other people. If you liked tonight's video, click on over to my channel and visit me every Thursday at 5 p.m. And if you didn't like it or my voice, then I really want you to come on over and visit me. Come make fun of me on my own channel. YouTube doesn't make any distinction between upvotes, downvotes, negative comments, or positive ones. It's all considered engagement, and engagement helps me. So thanks for the love and the hate. And thank you again, Mortis. You're a star.